Yo guys, and welcome back to the channel. Hope you guys are doing fantastic as usual. And today we are going to be continuing with our beloved to-do application as usual. And in the last episode we actually implemented this nice little sidebar view here. So you can actually add new boards now. So you can actually write a little board name here and boom, it will pop up right underneath there. So that's a really neat feature. And of course, you can also switch between them. We implemented that in one of the previous episodes as well. So we actually have multiple boards that you now can switch between so that you can have different tasks underneath them and kind of separate your work depending on the type of work that you are doing perhaps. So I feel like this is a really nice feature to have and something that we should continue working on to make it the absolute best. And one of the most important things now is to actually make it responsive so that we can actually use it on our mobile phone without any interruptions here. We want to be able to have this nice layout here as well on our mobile devices. And I'm not entirely sure how we are going to be implementing that. I feel like this select box that we had previously in when we first implemented that, I feel like that is kind of a nice approach perhaps for the mobile. We definitely can't have this whole sidebar, or I guess we could, but it won't be height screen, that's for sure. We kind of need to cram it down there in space, and I don't think it will look that good to have like a sidebar on top of everything. I mean, if I just try it out right now, I can see it's kind of bad. Perhaps you could have like a button here where you open up this sidebar. You can click this button and you open up this sidebar. I feel like that could actually be a nice solution perhaps. That's quite a nice fancy modern way to solve this perhaps. But we can't really have it on the top either. I mean, if I just try it out real quick. If I set this to flex rectangle column now to make it on top here, this is what I mean. I don't feel like this is a nice layout, you know, to have this hanging on top of every single page, especially to have like, if you have like 10 different boards here, it will look really bad and you have to navigate and then scroll down on your phone to get there. And I feel like it's a pretty cumbersome user experience. I don't feel like that is such a nice user design. Or so perhaps you could actually implement that nice sidebar. So if I just reload now to get back to where we were, I mean, currently we have kind of a problem here. Okay, yeah, we don't really have a problem. It's just it kind of needs to be scrolling here or something. We can't be overflowing like this. It's kind of cramming it like unnecessarily much. The browser is just panicking here, not sure what to do with this limited space that we're giving it. So maybe we can just give it a scroll or something so that I can still have a nice content. You know, it kind of looks a bit tight here. Everything is just crammed up. If I could just have the normal layout but just push it out so you can have like a side scroll or something perhaps, that would look a bit better. So if I just here add like overflow X scroll perhaps, then maybe we can do something like that. But I believe since we're doing a flex layout here, it won't really comply to that unless we give this flex child container here an actual fixed width or something, or like a minimum width or something to tell flex that, hey, we expect it to be at least this size, and if it's overflowing and it can't fit that space, then we simply want to add a scroll bar. So I feel like we could do something like min width or something on this element here. So if I do something like min width and then make it like 30 rem or something, and then we have that overflow X scroll. So just like I said, with this Tailwind classes, you can use the X and Y here to denote if it's horizontal or vertical that you are applying a class for. So currently here we have overflow X scroll. So we simply, when we overflow, we add a scroll bar. But we can see that there's a problem here since the body is not really following that fully. And let's see what that is about. So we can see that there is an overflow here. This element is causing an element to overflow. But if I just do the same thing here, if I just add overflow X scroll, will that work? Let's see here. Yes, it will. So let's add that here to that MX auto as well, I believe. So we can now see that we have the same color here. There's nothing weird going on about that color there. So now we actually have a scroll here. We can actually use this on our phone and we could actually scroll here and it would be kind of usable, but it wouldn't be nice. It's just like you would have like a website on your phone. Of course you can fit a website into your phone, but you would need to scroll and pan and zoom, and it's just not a nice user experience. You just kind of want to have it on one page and you don't want to fiddle around with your finger too much if you just want to read something. So what I meant is that we could probably have like a button here so we can open this sidebar whenever the user chooses. They don't need to see all of the boards all of the time, you know. They can just open it with a button, just click a button and this sidebar will open and that should be fine. So let's try implementing that. That shouldn't be hard. We're just going to be using our beloved conditional rendering here to add like a button, and whenever we click that button we can change a boolean value and then we can render it or something. So it shouldn't be too difficult. So we probably want to do this in sidebar.svelte since this is where we have our sidebar. But I think we want to control, or we want to place the button on outside of this sidebar component, of course, since we need it to be visible. Even if, we need the button to be visible at all times, So we can probably do something like export let visible, and this will be our flag to tell if we are gonna show this sidebar or not, simply. So if visible, then we render that with our nice beloved conditional rendering. And now we can see that this is also the default value of a boolean is of course always false. So now we no longer have that sidebar. But one thing I noticed here is that we actually have a problem now with this fixed width here. We have this fixed width of this min width of 30 rem, and 30 rem is probably actually larger than the viewport width, I think. So we have 374 pixels here, and 30 rem is more than that. So perhaps we can do something like 100 VW, so 100% of the viewport width. And you can see that looks good. Let's see if I bring back this sidebar now by putting the flag true here. Will that work? Let's see. Yes, it will. So that's really nice. It will have a minimum width of the viewport width, and that will still be true even if it's pushed to the side. It will still be the same size. It's not like it's 100% of the viewport width at all times. It's still the viewport width. The viewport width is still fixed. It still has a value. It's simply the size of the screen in our case here. So it's not like it's going to be using 100% of this width, of all of the width like currently in this window. It will still use the fixed value of 100 viewport width. So that's something to note. But you see that worked quite nicely, and we can also see that our flag was working since we assigned that to true now. But if I assign it back to not have a default value, then it will be false. And then we'll just control that with the help of a button. So I guess I can just add a little nice variable for that here. So I can just do something like visible, and then we'll have a variable called something like sidebar visible equals false as a default value. And that should hopefully work. And then in here, I guess in this container now, since we want it to be on this main container here, we have this nice flex layout to have them separated. So in this layout, I believe we want to have this button. So let's just use our cool button component that we created real quick. We can just swap it out later if we want to have a more custom design. So something like open sidebar, I guess. So open sidebar, got that nice button there. And when we click on this, we simply want to change that flag. You should probably put this in a function, but I'm just going to be a bit lazy here and just use an anonymous function here and set it from here. So sidebar visible will be it will be a toggle, so it will be the opposite value of what it is currently. Let's see if that works. So open sidebar, I guess there's more toggle sidebar now rather than open. So toggle sidebar, we can see that kind of works. Perhaps we just want to use like an icon here. I feel like that is more appropriate actually. I guess we also could add a new style here to our button. We have this nice, or I guess we already have a gray here. So I guess we can try using that. So if I used to use color gray, how will this look? I have completely forgotten about this. So gray doesn't look that good if I'm gonna be honest. I kind of want a more white one. So if I just do something like white, and then we can do BG, it will be BG white, and then we can have hover BG gray 50 or something. Let's see how that looks. So if I just use color white here as well, so do we have a nice white button. Of course this has to have the right text color, so I guess all of the other ones actually used text white since that had a nice contrast. But okay, this seems to work still. You gotta be careful here with this overriding here since we have text white here as well. I'm not completely sure about how consistent the ordering is when you compile Tailwind CSS and stuff like that. So we need to make sure that the order is correct and that we're actually overriding it here with text black. But hopefully that is the case. We can see that it works now at least, and that looks pretty good. I feel like, however, we should probably put an icon here instead of toggle sidebar. I think it's a bit more clear to the user. Just like a picture says 100 words or whatever they say. So I guess we can use an icon for this, and let's use our beloved Iconify library as well for that. So please do something like icon here, and then I guess we can copy it. So if I just go to iconify.design and then find something here, so I guess we can have open perhaps, I'm not sure, open. let's see, this is pretty nice icon that kind of shows the action that we intend to have here. So if I just copy this over here, let's see how that works out. So just import it here. Let's see how that works. So yeah, it kind of works. It's not that big though, so perhaps we can increase the size a little bit. So if I do width 30 and height 30, how will that look? It will look not that good if I'm gonna be honest. So 25, it got kind of a lot of padding here. So I guess, like I said, we could probably just want to use another component for this, or I guess we can just use a divider here or something else, since it has a bit more padding on horizontally, which we don't want to have for this. We kind of want it to be square here. So if I just make this button a divider instead, we can just apply the classes. Since we have Tailwind, we can do some of this stuff really quickly without any pain developing CSS for it. So if I just do BG white, and then I guess I can just copy the whole thing here really, and whatever this is, perhaps rounded as well. So BG white, and we want rounded. Is there something else? Yeah, I guess. Yeah, since this is now a block element, we kind of need to be careful about that. We don't need to make it a divider. We can just make it a button as well. Of course, it's more a button than a divider, so that is more appropriate. So now it's a button. And then we can add some nice padding as well. But we can do it more uniformly here. So if I just do P2 perhaps, that looks pretty good. I guess P1 is more appropriate. Yeah, there we go. So now we have this nice little button here that we can use to open this sidebar, and I'm actually pretty happy with this design. I'm a bit, it actually looks a bit better than I thought, but perhaps we want to make this a blue button as well. I'm not really sure. Since we have access to Tailwind classes, this should be really piece of cake here. So if I make this BG blue and then text white again, let's see how that looks. Yeah, since we have this nice color scheme, that did not look good, but if I make this BG blue 600, then that should hopefully give the same effect. Yeah, since we have this nice color scheme here with these buttons and everything, so I feel like it makes more sense to have it in blue color. But if you are a designer, feel free to comment here, since I have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about with this design stuff. So we have this nice button now, and we can click this to open that. I guess we can change the button as well depending on if it's open or not. So left panel open, I guess we can have left panel close. If they are consistent in their naming, then hopefully that shouldn't be a problem. So if I just make this left panel close instead, hopefully that should work. And yes, it did. So we can just switch this out now, I guess, but depending on if it's open or not. So we have this icon here. We can simply use Svelte in here. So left panel open, we only need to change this part really. So of course, we should think about minimizing code duplication, and this is the only part that is uncommon really. So left panel, and then we set either open or close. So sidebar visible. If the sidebar is visible, we want to show the close icon so that you can close it. So close, and otherwise we want to show the open icon. Let's see if that works. And yes, it did. Isn't that amazing? I feel like that looks pretty neat, and I'm very happy with that effect there. So I think we'll run with that for now, and we can always change it later if we have another better idea. So we got that covered. Now we are responsive again, hopefully. I guess when we switch a board, I guess the user kind of wants to close it. I think that is the most sensible thing. When you have selected a board, you probably just want to have it closed for you. So let's just add that real quick as well. So board list, that should hopefully be select board, current board ID, and then we need to do something here. We have this in here, so we probably can do something like dispatch selected. And then in sidebar here, we can do something like on selected. Then we simply want, let's just be lazy here again. Let's be consistent in our laziness, of course. So visible will be false now. Whenever we select an item here, hopefully it should now close. And yes, it did. And something weird happened there. I think that is actually due to two-way data binding. We haven't actually bound anything here in this sidebar, I believe, or rather in here in app.svelte, we want to bind this so that we actually change it back. We want to change this value as well, which we didn't really do when we didn't have two-way data binding. But now that we have two-way data binding, hopefully it should work as expected. So yes, it seems to do. And when I click this now, you can see that changed as well, and there's no problem anymore. So I'm really happy with this design so far. Oh, and something I just realized now when I go back to the desktop PC mode here is that we actually have this button here on the PC as well, which is of course which is of course really logical here since we haven't done anything to hide it on the desktop. But is that something we want to do? I guess we kind of want the sidebar to be visible since we have so much space. Like I said, when we are in full view here, when we have like a full screen to work with, it kind of looks bad to have this big stretched layout here, and I feel like it would be nicer to have this sidebar out here. It helps remedy that a bit. And oh, okay, we still have this problem here, so we kind of need to do something responsive here. We have this min width to be minimum the viewport width here, and we can see that is still applied here on the desktop PC. So now that we went responsive, we didn't really think about the desktop side of things, and of course you need to have some of these things in mind, and otherwise you'll kind of run into problems just like I did here. So always good to plan a bit when you're going to be changing the design or structure so radically. I guess for this min width, we also want to have this behind some kind of media query or something. Since this is 100% of the viewport width, perhaps there's actually a tailwind class for this. So I think it's like min width screen, perhaps. I'm not really sure. So min width screen, will that work if I go back now here into this layout? Will things be broken? Okay, they're kind of broken. Let's have a little Google. If I just search for viewport here, so viewport with W screen, min W screen. So I don't think there's actually a min W screen. Then we just kind of apply it to be minimum of the width of the screen, but it won't be able to expand more than that. Is that something we want though? Would that be a problem? If I just go back to this layout now, yeah, it's still kind of broken. It's not working as I thought it would. What is it applying here when we do W screen here? So it's not really applying anything. It's not working at all. So we want to use min width here. I think there's some subtle difference here when we, especially when we're dealing with Flexbox, we're being very strict when we use min width here and tell that Flex, hey, you really need to obey my rules here. So I guess we can just do some vanilla CSS and refresh our minds here how to do some media queries. So this will be, what is a nice class name? Now that I'm kind of spoiled with Tailwind CSS and these inline classes that I now need to come up with an appropriate class name. So this will kind of be the main content, I guess. So it's more like a main content of this main content on this side here. So if I just add some nice isolated CSS, it was quite some time since I said that word. So main content, we want to target that class, and we want to have this behind a media query. So media screen and max width 768 pixels, I believe, is pretty appropriate for a mobile phone. Then we want to apply minimum width of 100 viewport width. And then we can just get, well, okay, we didn't have anything there. So let's see if that works now. And yes, it seems to work. Isn't that cool? And if I go back to desktop mode here, is there any problem? No, it is kind of cramming it down, which is exactly what we wanted. So that is really nice. But like I said, we kind of want to hide this button whenever we are on a desktop PC. We simply want it to be visible at all times. But how are we gonna be implementing that? So one of the things I actually wanted to show you guys earlier, but we didn't really need to have a use for, is a Svelte windows. There's actually a special tag, or what you would say in Svelte, that you can use to bind stuff with above vanilla JS. There's actually a window which you can get stuff like window dimensions from, but the nice thing with Svelte window is that you can actually be reactive with it. So whenever the screen width changes, you can bind this to a variable, and whenever that screen width changes, it will actually change and update that variable as well. And that is a really nice feature that I want to show you guys. So why not do it right now? I guess we can start off really simple here with this button here. We only want to show this when we are on the phone, so you can simply do something like MD hidden, I believe, and that should be hiding it on the desktop PC, and that seemed to work. And now we actually have no way of opening that sidebar again. Of course, if we are lazy now, we can have the default value of this sidebar to be true, and then we don't have any problem. We can't really close it then, but I feel like for a mobile phone, you don't want to have it open immediately. You can just open it if you want and feel like it. I guess I can handle this here, or I guess I will handle it rather in app.svelte, since this is where we actually set this value. So we're actually going to be using something called Svelte window, and with the help of Svelte window, look at, just like I said, you can actually bind two params here. You can see all of these params here that you can bind to, and the thing that I want to bind to here is inner width, and this is actually the inner width of this window. It's not the screen width per se, but more the inner width of the browser frame here, and that is what we want to use. So we can actually bind this to a variable, and then we can set this as screen width or something like that. It's not really screen width, but I like to think of it as screen width, so I'll do that. So screen width, now I actually have access to that screen width. We can just output this somewhere if we want to. So screen width, there we have that. So if I change my screen width, now we can see that it actually changes. Isn't that cool? So we can actually have access to that now. Let's just see if this will work. I don't think this will actually work immediately. If I set this to do something like screen width is more than 678 pixels, I don't think that will work immediately, since this will run after that, I believe, or it won't be available when it runs this code here. So we kind of need it to be more reactive or something, but that's kind of problematic really, since we don't want to update it at all times. If you just resize your phone, or if you just resize your browser window, you don't want your sidebar to be flying in and out all of the time. So I mean, one other way to do this, which is not reactive, so we're not going to be using Svelte window, but you could just do something like window.innerWidth, I believe. So if I just do window.innerWidth, then we have, well, okay, if that is more than 678 pixels, then we kind of hard code it. So whenever we open and render this component for the first time, it will calculate that and set it to whatever that value is. So if I go to the phone now and reload here, we can see that it starts out hidden. But if I reload here, you can see that it's now visible, and that's kind of better, I guess. But if you want it to be reactive, you can make it reactive as well. We can just do something like on screen width change, and then we can have like a screen width and take that in, and then we can do something like on screen width change, and then we take in screen width. Then we can simply do something like sidebar visible is this value here, or rather this value here. So you can see now if I change this, it will kind of work and be more reactive, but I don't think that is something you want. If you open it, you don't want it to just immediately close or something like that, but if that's an effect you want to add, then you know how to do it at least now, and this is a really nice technique that you can use for a lot of other stuff when it comes to reactive layouts and such, when you want to know the screen width and when you want that variable to be reactive. So now we can actually have access to a real-time updated value of the screen width, and you can apply different CSS classes based on that as well, even though you shouldn't probably do that. You can just use media queries for that, but you could do it if you wanted to. But I guess I'll get rid of it sadly and just hard code it whenever we load the page for the first time. So let's just do this instead and see if that, since that is probably the most sensible thing for the user. So there we go. Now it starts out here as being hidden on the phone, and when I run it here, it will always stay shown here, and we won't have any way to hide it. So another feature that I wanted to add is actually the ability to rename these boards, and that shouldn't be that difficult. We actually have done this a couple of times now with the help of contenteditable, and I feel like that is a really nice technique. So you just click this or change this text as it is written. But we can actually see that when I click this now, it actually hides it. And that is also part of that responsiveness that we applied. And now we're breaking other parts of our code. That's kind of a shame. So I guess in sidebar.svelte, we kind of need to know if the size is something. So we could actually use Svelte window here. So why not try it out again? So Svelte window, and then we can bind inner width here to screen width. And then we can do something with this. You should probably put this in a store or something similar to have it global if you're going to be using this in multiple places, but I'm just showing it to you guys now how to use this. The best practice would probably be to use it in a Svelte store, and you actually don't really need to use Svelte window here. You could actually just use the window, so I guess we actually won't be doing that. I'm just I just want to use it, but there's actually not that clear of a use case for it just yet. So on selected, I can just bind this now to a function since we're going to be doing a lot of stuff. So on selected, I just do something like if window.innerWidth. If it's more than 768, we just want to return early here. Otherwise, we can do visible is false, and hopefully that should work now. So whenever I switch here, it's not going anywhere. But if I do this on the phone, hopefully it will work. And yes, it will. So we didn't really have any use for Svelte window. It's more if you want to have some help with binding this reactively. So you can bind this to a variable and you can pass in the screen with as a prop somewhere else and handle it in a more reactive fashion. But since we're doing these things, we can just check the window.innerWidth and we don't need to bind it. We don't need to be that super reactive here where we just look for any changes. It just needs to check it at this point. And if it is a desktop device, we simply don't want to hide it. But like I said, we should probably now implement the ability for the user to rename their boards, and hopefully that shouldn't be too difficult. So we have this nice board list, and hopefully in here we will be able to use contenteditable. So instead of putting this inside of these tags, we simply want to use text content again. So we can just bind text content when we want to bind to the actual text value in here. And that is what we do change when we use contenteditable. So we just bind this now instead to board.name. We should see absolutely no difference if it didn't break. So is required for text content. Yeah, so we need to add contenteditable, which we can just add real quickly here. So contenteditable equals true. And now we actually have contenteditable. But okay, so we need to make sure that whenever we click this text here, we don't want to actually select the board, and that's gonna be a bit difficult. So on the desktop it did work, but when I'm on the phone it treats that as a click. I'm not really sure why that is. That is a bit weird. I'm not sure if that is actually like a bad emulator thing, if this emulator is not working properly, since I don't feel like that is the behavior that you would expect, but perhaps we can do something with this. So if I just check out this, okay, so it's actually the element. Yeah, okay, I see where the problem comes from. So we actually have this as, we just apply it to the actual, we just set this text on the actual divider. We should probably just wrap this in a span or something so that we have another element that we don't want to pass through these click events on. So if I just copy all of this into a span, then hopefully that should work. So now if I have the same effect, okay, it's still kind of broken. I'm not really sure why that is then. If I just do something like on click and then I do stop propagation, will that work? Yes, it will. So it's just propagating. Now that's kind of the default behavior with HTML, that if you have elements on top of each other, then they will be propagated. So the element that is on the top will of course receive the event first, but then it will propagate to the parent element, and we can use stop propagation here to prevent that from happening. And we also did this in the modal, I believe, here. So we used stop propagation here to stop that event propagation. But I'm not really sure about the user experience here. It actually feels a bit weird. If I click this text, I kind of expect to actually select the board. I wouldn't click here on the outside of the whole button. I would click on the actual text to change it. So I feel like this is a pretty bad user experience if I'm going to be completely honest. So perhaps we're actually not going to be using contenteditable here. I feel like it would be more sensible here to use perhaps like an input field on here. Perhaps you can have like, you can actually put the board name or something, and then you can have contenteditable if you want. But on the actual sidebar here, I don't feel like we would want to have it on this text here. So I guess we can try removing that now, and if we can implement it in another way. So if I just undo every change that we applied here. So in the actual to-do board, we probably want to show this name, and we're just passing it in as a task column array, which we don't want to do. We probably want to take in task board, so this will be the actual board. Now we need to change this. Since we have boards here, we need to use board.columns everywhere instead of columns, but we will actually have access now to that. So hopefully this should work and be reactive as well. I think so. So board.columns, everything broke completely. So bind columns. So instead we want to bind board to current board, and let's see if that works. So I just add some tasks here. That seems to be working. Nice. everything seems to be working as usual, hopefully. If I just reload here, everything isn't completely destroyed, it seems like, so that is always a good sign. It doesn't seem like there's anywhere else that we actually showed a to-do board either, so that should hopefully be the only change that we need to apply. So now that we have access to that board, we can also show the board title. So if I can do something like h2 here, we can do board.name. Default board, yay, we're showing something there. So I guess I can center this as well. I'm not really sure how that will look on the desktop, but let's see. So text centered, I can make this text 3XL or something. If I add some nice margin here, MB10 and MT4 perhaps, that looks alright, I think. And if I go now to the desktop PC, how will that look? That actually looks kind of nice. It's kind of nice to show the current board that is active. So let's see why that hidden. Yeah, this is probably because I was on the phone previously. So you have default board here. I'm not gonna actually change this. There's no problem. We can click everything we want here. But now we actually want to have the ability here to change this name, and that shouldn't be too difficult with the help of content editable. So like I said, we can just move this over now into bind text content, and that will be board.name, and then we want to apply content editable as well, and then this will be editable. But we also need to be able to save this. So we're binding everything to board name, but we're not really persisting that. We're not saving to local storage. So let's see how we did this previously. I'm not really sure what approach I've taken before. So bind text content on title blur, yeah. So we do this whenever we focus out of this element, and I feel like that is pretty appropriate as well. I think my thought here was that we don't need to save to local storage on every single key press. We used to do that whenever we focus out of that title. I feel like that is probably decent. I hope that blur also is called whenever you like reload the page. If you click here and then reload, hopefully that will work as well. Otherwise, you kind of have a problem there. So I guess we can try that out and experiment as well. So on blur. So on blur, we want to do on name blur, and then we can create a function for that. So then we simply want to do dispatch update, I believe. We have this kind of a generic update function whenever something has changed within a board, and we haven't. The only thing that we do with that, I believe, is that we just do on update, we save to local storage. So we're just saving the data that has changed. We're really dynamic here. So on name blur, hopefully now if I click somewhere else, that will be persisted, and yes it will. Isn't that nice? Also notice that we have a spell checking here, so we can disable that real quick. Spell check is false. Change that now, reload, that should be working nice. So default board instead. If I change that to default board, we can also see that it updated here in the sidebar, which is really nice. So now we have that implemented, but like I said, let's see if this works now. If I change this here and then I reload the page, will it be saved? Yeah, so it seems that blur is also called whenever you close your phone or perhaps reload the page, or whenever something else happens that interrupts the focus here of that element. So that's a good sign that whenever we leave the page as well, that we actually save to local storage if the user has changed the title or something like that. So if I change this to personal or something like that, I can reload that and we can see that the change is persisted. I can do work here, and that is actually not changed fully. It's not actually changing here, which is kind of what we want to do. We kind of want this to change as well when we change it up here. So let's see what we can do about that. If I just log out board name, you see that board name is being reactive here, but it's not updating here in the sidebar for some reason, and I'm not entirely sure why that is. So I guess we have this board list, and we just loop over these boards, each boards as board. If I just do a nice JSON stringify of these boards, let's see what happens. So I get this really big JSON that is completely disrupting my view. Kind of not what I wanted, if I'm gonna be honest. So see here, I have app.svelte, I bind board, current board. So whenever something changes in this board, we are just binding to board, but we're not really updating the whole board's array. We're doing that really. The internal value, the string is being changed, let's put it that way, but Svelte doesn't know about it. It seems like, since it's simply not updating, it would be updating whenever I type here as well. So I'm not really sure what we can do about that, since we're dealing with current board. If I just log out current board.name, let's see if it will be persisted here. So it's actually updating here, and there's no problem with that. So clearly current board is working, but boards is not working. So on update, I guess on update we can actually like reassign something on current board update or something. So, and in here we can save the local storage first, but then we can apply boards equals boards. Let's see if that will work. So if I just do personal now and blur there, we can see that works. So just like I said, Svelte doesn't know about this change since we're binding here to current board. We could probably make this completely reactive by doing some really expensive finding algorithm and finding the board from the array and stuff like that and using just boards. But just like I said, we need to be reactive here. We need to tell Svelte that the boards array changed, and it did change, but it's kind of expensive if it would check all of the changes inside of it as well and every single property that has updated. So we simply need to tell Svelte that, hey, this data has changed internally, and that we do also when we blur. So it's kind of, it would be kind of annoying to see this change here as well, since we haven't really confirmed our choice. It's just we're changing it up on every keystroke, and then when we're actually done, if I make this work now, I blur this, we can see now it actually updates. So I feel like that is the more sensible experience for the user as well. So I feel like this was a nice little speed bump here to actually slow down a bit and think about Svelte reactivity and to make sure that we're not doing stupid stuff. And I feel like this is a nice improvement as well. I feel like that we got a pretty nice effect from that. So just hide that obnoxious text here, and hopefully you can now change this. Let's see if I go to the phone, how will that look? So you can hide this layout. I can change to ASF SJDF, and I want to change this keyboard spam into homework or something, and then I change this and boom, it has updated here, and that kind of works, doesn't it? I make this back to work, I have to work, I want this to be personal instead, I change that, I reload, and everything seems to be persistent. Isn't that amazing? So I feel like we got some really nice functionality implemented in this episode, and I feel like it's getting quite long now, so I shouldn't drag it out for way too long. The new sidebar looks a lot better now on the phone, which is nice. Also had some nice design thoughts and user experience endeavors. I feel like we really got out stronger on the other side here, so you can now change that. And I feel like in the next episode we should also add a quick little delete button so that I can actually delete a board, add a little confirmation modal for that. It shouldn't be too difficult. And then hopefully we should also do some refactoring in the next episode. I feel like the code is getting pretty convoluted and messy right now, so I feel like we should definitely take a moment to breathe a bit and look at the code and get rid of some of this stuff that we have commented out, see what we need to keep and what is sensible to keep. We don't need to be hoarding here and saving all bits and pieces of code that we're no longer ever going to be touching again. You know, we have a lot of commented code here that we probably don't need, and we can definitely make some better design choices in our code perhaps. So I feel like we should slow down in the next episode a bit and think about that as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Feel free to like or dislike depending on what you thought of it. Also feel free to subscribe if you want to be part of this community that I'm trying to build. I will be very grateful for that. And feel free to leave me a comment about your thoughts and opinions, and feel free to share how your project is going. I would love to know. Other than that, I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace out.